Deliberations did resume this morning about 2.5 hours ago at 8:30 local time in Minneapolis. Will the jury be able to reach a unanimous decision? That's the big question at this hour. Joining us to talk about it, civil rights and trial attorney and entertainment law attorney Lee Hutton, and attorney and former radio host Roshini Rajkumar. Both of them are in Minneapolis. I am not. It's cold up there. And this jury is working, and they continue to work 17 hours. Let's talk about, first of all, your initial thoughts of where we are now. Lee, to you first. What do you think's happening?
First off, hi, Roshini. How are you doing? Here's what's happening. The jury is taking some time to get it right. However, what a great situation for the defense is that there apparently is one or more that's standing to their guns and they can't reach a unanimous verdict. Recently, the Supreme Court of the United States have dealt with whether or not certain states or just globally, do you have to have a unanimous verdict? In states like Louisiana and other states, they have decided that you don't have to have a unanimous verdict for that to happen. However, the recent Supreme Court decision basically said, yes, in these type of criminal trials, we want a unanimous verdict. And the judge, Regina Chu here in this situation, has to be careful not to force a unanimous judgment, or otherwise that can be reviewed by the Court of Appeals.
Roshini, your take on where this is going, given the question that the jury asked yesterday, what do we do if we can't agree?
Well, when the jury asks questions, I'm always heartened because it means they are really taking their job seriously. They're not trying to come to some sort of quick judgment. They understand they do have to all agree. So the questions, I think, are good. The fact that we're now past 17 hours, going on 17 and a half hours, I think that says that we're either going to end up with some sort of hung jury, or if there is a guilty verdict, it may be a split situation where both counts are not found guilty. So I think just the fact that they're deliberating and it's gone on for a while, we have to put that in perspective, though. They had several days of a trial. What was it, like 8 days of trial? So there's a lot of testimony to go through. It's also taking the beyond a reasonable doubt seriously, and that is a high standard. So all of this doesn't concern me at all. I'm just definitely waiting to see what they decide.
Lee, the fact that it has taken so long, in your experience, after a jury comes and says, hey, what do we do in this situation? We're not agreeing. How often does the Minnesota Allen charge work? I mean, how often do you find that judge sends you back in, keep working, and I get a ballpark of percentage-wise, how often do they come back still hung, or how often do they come back and say, oh, we figured it out?
As we're dealing with the Allen charge, what we call it in Minnesota and throughout other states, is how long are you going to make the jury kind of discuss and deliberate? This is a discretionary decision on the judge. Here are the factors in this particular case. Number one, we're coming up to a holiday in a couple of days, and Judge Chu is going to have to reason with that because currently the jurors are sequestered. And so I don't believe Judge Chu is going to require them to continue deliberating and not go home over the holidays. So we have about another 24 hours or a little bit more before the judge is going to call an impasse. The second issue that's going on here is that the judge, again, has to balance whether or not she's forcing unanimous verdict. And if this is the case where the unanimous verdict cannot be reached, I think we're probably going to get until the end of the day, the 23rd, and the judge is going to make a decision to accept whatever the outcome of the jury was at that time.
Roshini, your thoughts on that other question, that they wanted to hold the gun. What do you think? Can the zip ties be removed from Exhibit 199, Potter's gun, so it can be held out of the evidence box? What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think they were really listening to the attorneys and the questioning, and they really want to feel for themselves that difference in weight between the taser and the gun, and really maybe play out for themselves. Could a reasonable officer have made this mistake, even with that much experience? Could it be a human mistake, or is there really such a great difference that even once she drew the gun, thinking she was drawing the taser, she should have known just by the weight of it? So that was not a surprise to me that they asked for that. It seems like a very curious jury. And again, that heartens me because they want to get it right, whatever conclusion they do come to.
Lee, your thoughts on the gun question?
Yeah, I agree with Roshini. I think this is a jury that does want to get it right. And there's been so much testimony with regard to the weight of the gun. Now, again, and I said this before, one of the questions that I don't think was asked was if that goes to the recklessness and the mistake with the gun or not to be used in the first part was why didn't the other officers draw their weapon at all? And I think that certainly shifts the burden to the defense to explain why Officer Potter was the only officer to use some type of force. But I agree with Roshini. I think this is a curious question. I think it's a right question for the jury to ask to balance the weight.
One of the things that is sort of an undercurrent of this is that there has been a request for an upward departure in this case, like we saw in the Chauvin case, and it came out during trial whether it was going to be bifurcated, and it was decided that this would be handled after, if indeed there is a guilty verdict. Roshini, your thoughts on that decision, that the state would go after an upward departure in sentencing in this case against this defendant?
I just think it's ridiculous. I mean, based on what we've seen, the history of this officer, and a lot of her history has to do with domestics and things like that, and crisis teams that she's on. It just seems like, look, this person, I think we saw remorse. Her life has been ruined. To go for an upward departure in this situation, I mean, this isn't the case to make that kind of an example. And as you can tell, I feel pretty strongly about that. I really don't know what the end result of that being granted. Fine, go ahead and do it, prosecution. The narrative in our city right now, in our community right now, is pretty anti-law enforcement, Ted. So it didn't surprise me, but I don't think that's a really great strategic move. There are so many other things they could do here.
Lee, your thoughts on that, and also to follow up on Roshini, the narrative in your community. In a lot of cities, crime has gone up. In Twin Cities, the same thing. St. Paul just set a murder record. Has it come back a little bit in the Twin Cities, in your estimation, in terms of the relationship between policing and the community?
No, and let's be specific. The underlying issue is kind of this America's wart with police officers and their interaction with people of color. I mean, we've seen cases where individuals of color have been going away from the officers and get shot in the back. And I think the prosecution asked some really pointed questions. Did Dante Wright swing at you? Did he threaten your life? Did he make any attempt to hurt you? But yet and still, there was a use of force. Now, while this was arguably a mistake, the fact that the matter is that mistake ended in a person of color at the heels of starting the Chauvin trial, where a young kid lost his life. So I think the narrative and that the prosecution wants to have is that we're going to be tough on this interaction with people of color. Now, of course, a lot of people don't want to have that candid conversation, but this is the underlying factor that exists. And Minnesota is still struggling with that narrative.
A lot of cities are as well. We're going to step aside and take a break. We're still watching that clock, 17 hours and counting, almost 17 and a half.